on behalf of the Baha'i Chair for Studies in Development at Devi Ahilya Vishwavidyalaya, Indore. I would like to very warmly welcome our distinguished speaker for today's lecture, Professor G.N. Devy, and also our many esteemed and valued participants who are joining us on both on the Zoom webinar as well as through our live Facebook feed. As part of the series of lectures being organized by the Baha'i Chair for Studies in Development titled Dialogues on Development, we are pleased to welcome Professor Devy to deliver this lecture on the theme Dynamic Knowledge, Diminishing Language, and Uneven Development. Drawing on illustrative examples from India and several other countries, the lecture will explore the link between knowledge, language, and social and economic development. Dr. Devy will provide a historical overview of how knowledge became an institution whose foundations have in recent times been rapidly shifting. The lecture will present an overview of how language diversity has helped the growth of human cognitive abilities and how in the past many decades this linguistic diversity has been rapidly diminishing. The lecture is intended to deepen insight into the organic links between the content and pedagogy of our educational institutions and the society in which we find ourselves. Before we begin, just a short introduction to our esteemed speaker for today, who of course does not require an introduction. Professor Ganesh Narayan Devy is a thinker, writer, and cultural activist, and an institution builder best known for the People's Linguistic Survey of India and the Adivasi Academy created by him. He writes in 3 languages, Marathi, Gujarati, and Hindi, and English, I'm sorry. His first full-length book in English after Amnesia was hailed immediately upon its publication as a classic in literary theory. Since its publication, he has written and edited close to 90 influential books. Professor Devy was awarded the Padma Shri by the Government of India, the 𝗵𝗂𝗃𝗆 Award by UNESCO, and SARC Writers Foundation Award, which I'm sure I have not done justice to the many achievements and the distinguished career of Professor Devy. Before we request him to begin, I would like to just say a few words by way of housekeeping. Participants are requested to share their comments or questions in the Q&A box and in the comment section if you are joining us from Facebook. And after Professor Devy delivers his comments, we will have time to share your questions and comments with him for his response. So without taking more time, over to you, Professor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Namaskar, salam. Professor Arash, you've been extremely generous and kind to me in asking me to give this lecture in the series initiated by the Baha'i Chair at the Devi Ahilya Vishwavidyalaya, Indore. And I feel really honored that you thought of asking me to give this lecture. I have some acquaintance with the principles and values of the Baha'i philosophy And I respect those principles and values. And it is therefore that I have a sense of homecoming when I come here this afternoon to speak to you. The area that you asked me, Professor Raj, to speak on was development. And you being so kind, sort of putting in the language bit, because somehow my name is associated with language. And I'm very glad to bring in these two, together with what is happening to our knowledges in the 21st century. I said knowledges not because I wanted to fault in grammar, but because I wanted to allude to a report prepared by a Canadian philosopher, Lyotard, when the Quebec government asked him to produce a report on knowledge. He did. This was in 1980s. I think it was in 1985 or 86, when Lyotard's report was released. And it came out in the form of a book. The title of the book is The Postmodern Condition. So Lyotard was talking of a new situation in the arena of knowledge. And one of the key sentences in the opening pages of that book was, the world has now to think of knowledges rather than knowledge. I recall that when I studied in universities, the world had a great certainty about what knowledge is or what knowledge was. But that certainty about the epistemic structure, the epistemic architecture, has received a lot of challenge, many challenges indeed, over the last several decades, or perhaps I might say almost for a century. Things have been shifting very, very rapidly beyond recognition of those who are knowledge practitioners. When I was reading Lyotard's book, a question came to my mind. I mean, Lyotard said that knowledge can no longer be taught in terms of analogies, but in terms of, we have to think of it in terms of paralogies. Of course, it was difficult for students and teachers to follow what he was saying. But I wanted to mention that a question came to my mind, and that was, has not knowledge always been changing, always been shifting throughout its past? Let me elaborate a little bit on this question, because we need to recognize the nature of the change in knowledge in past eras and the nature of change in the field of knowledge in our time. And we have to recognize that the change taking place now is unprecedented. So about the change in the past, let me take an example from an area which I understand, and that is the area of theater, poetry, literature. Almost 200 years back, Aristotle proposed a theory of literature, a theory of poetry, a theory of drama. And that theory hinged on the term catharsis. That is, he was saying literature purifies humans of their emotional turmoil and brings them back to a normalcy, at least for a while. And that was the great function of tragedy, as Aristotle had described. But Aristotle's entire philosophy of literature, of poetry, hinged on something else outside literature. And that thing outside literature was the Greek worldview. The Greek worldview I mean, literally the view of the world as the Greeks understood the world. And we have to appreciate that civilization had already found settled forms much before Aristotle, at least for 2000 or 2500 years before Aristotle was the Egyptian civilization. So when Socrates, Plato, Aristotle were thinking about things, they were thinking about sophisticated thought, sophisticated concepts. For the Greeks in those times, in ancient times, the worldview was that this world is like a box, shaped like a box. The top of the box has, imagine them to be holes. I'm oversimplifying. There are perforations. And through those perforations, that is what we call the sky, is like the lid on the box. Through those perforations in that lid, trickles during night some light. I mean, they did not think that the stars that we think are there. They thought they were cavities, vacuums, and perforations, as I'm saying in an oversimplified manner. And light trickles down to our world. So they assumed that there must be an arena or area or a domain of existence which is full of light, which is above the sky. And if in our day we have light, when in our night we have darkness, but there light still continues to be there, that light must be perennial light. This they juxtapose or counterpoise with the idea of Hades, or an area that is the under the earth, which is full of darkness. And they concluded quite firmly, without an iota of doubt, that it is the mixture of the darkness that emanates from the nether world, from the subterranean world, and the light that percolates through what we call heavens. But heaven is not the term they use philosophically, but for simplification, I'm saying heaven. So the light coming from above and the darkness coming from beneath or below mix and generate what is called shadow. This became this became a central philosophical obsession for Plato. Plato was trying to see how the body and the shadow could be disentangled, how the two could be separated. And that is what he describes in that famous passage about a caveman stepping out, standing at the face of the mouth of the cave, and suddenly seeing that a very long shadow of his own body is fallen inside, which terrified the caveman. The substance between the shadow and the relationship between the shadow and the substance became therefore the abiding foundation of all sciences and philosophical thought during the Greek times. And it is out of that interest that Aristotle described theater as an act of reproducing the images up there. If our objects die and perish, the objects up there will never perish or die because it is full of, that area is full of light. That was the assumption. And therefore, Aristotle felt that if there is one table up there, that is enough. The world up there does not require millions or thousands of tables or millions or thousands of chairs. One table, one chair, one house. Only the concept of houseness, chairness, tableness was enough. This concept they call idea with I capital. And that world above they call the ideal world. And the function of literature was decided to be production or reproduction of the ideal world. However, inferior that production or reproduction may be. Now, I described all of this at great length to show that just some 1,000 years later, this entire idea of heavens above, the world of death beneath us, we in between, like a tiffin box, 3-story, having 3 containers, that was thrown out completely. And the idea of ideal, not ideal in the sense we understand today, but ideal in the sense the Greek philosophy understood, was discarded. And dramaticians, writers, and poets started saying, let's say if we go further down in history, by the time one came to Dante, poets and writers were saying that it is not the business of poets and writers to think about some other world. It is the business of poets and writers to make this world superior than it is today. So rather than being mimetic, rather than copying those ideals in literature or philosophy, it is much better to be didactic, to produce ideas here and spread them among the society. What happened in this shift was the episteme had changed. Episteme is, in simpler words, like what is a brick to a house, what is a brick to a building. These are the episteme is the building block of knowledge. Once the episteme changes, all the structures that we humans have created as knowledge, they start disintegrating and they reorganize. Something similar happened some centuries later in Europe, particularly, where people earlier said that memory is a sickening factor in one's thought. Imagination is a sickening thought in a sickening element in one's thought, but memory is superior. Now, this is what Hobbes had said. Hobbes, who was a political philosopher of his times, had said that images in the mind are decaying impressions of the world. And the decay inside the brain or the mind is so perfect that if one were to touch those images, one's thought also starts getting imbalance. You will be surprised, friends, to know that the entire medical science of that time was based on this idea. And so Gray's, the Anatomy of Melancholy, a big 1,500 pages book, was published, became extremely influential. And in that Anatomy of Melancholy, it was argued that most of the errors, moral errors and social errors that humans commit are because of the mood of melancholy, which, as that book explained, is result of a chemical produced in the spleen, which rises as vapors and hits the brain and produces strange kind of images or imagination. I mean, I mentioned this, the political philosophy and the medical science, but even in creative arts of that time, we see a similar kind of thinking. In William Shakespeare's King Lear, there is the story of an old king, a very generous king. Actually, Shakespeare has said in that play about King Lear that Lear was every inch a king, every inch a king. There was nothing unprincely in him, neither in his body, nor in his actions or in his thoughts. And yet, during the old age, just before his death, sometime before his death, Lear decides to distribute his kingdom among his 3 daughters. I was in Britain watching performance of this play, where some of the greatest actors of our time had participated, they were acting. And I noticed that Lear is shown in that scene 1 as being inside a dark cave-like thing. That is, the spleen was reproduced on the stage, and Lear was shown as somebody who was hit by this disease, as Shakespeare's times accepted, disease of melancholia. Shall we ever accept that medicine or medical philosophy today? We will not. Just as Aristotle and Plato's idea of ideas got discarded and a new episteme was brought in, similarly, this medieval or late medieval idea of memory as being superior to imagination was discarded entirely at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. And some of the greatest minds of that time in Europe, at least in Europe, such as Goethe, such as Coleridge, William Blake, Wordsworth and Keats, they were celebrating imagination as an agency, as a power that could liberate humans. And you probably know that when the French Revolution took place for liberty, fraternity, and equality, the literature that promoted those ideas were ideas promoting the strength of imagination or image. And in fact, if you were to look at the paintings of the time, such as Turner and so on, 19th century, you'll notice that Turner shows how once imagination starts becoming active in the mind, suddenly the world gets lit up. I mean, in Turner's paintings, we have very somber, very semi-dark areas where the viewer is standing, and suddenly there's a source of light, suddenly changing the mood. Within a single painting, Turner can show us the journey from the ordinariness of life to the life of imagination. William Blake had the keenness to say that whatever imagination seizes as truth exists, whether it existed before or not. Keats went even a few steps, but I will not dwell too much on that. I'm trying to say that in the past, the episteme did change. In the past, the idea of the earth, how it is shaped, the cosmos, how it is shaped, what human relationship is to nature, they have changed. In the past, from the idea of God creating the world, scientists and those who came under the spell of sciences have moved to the idea of evolution as the path of human advent. All of that has happened. But this time, the change taking place is of a different nature. In the past, a given field of knowledge was replaced by another field of knowledge, but keeping knowledge on a steady path. What has happened in our time is that knowledge production and knowledge consumption, knowledge storage and knowledge transaction have started moving out of the human domain, and they have revisiting this debate between memory and imagination. They have actually trivialized both memory and imagination, and the shape of the world as understood those traditional fields of knowledge. Memory, as you know, constructs for humans time. If we had no memory, humans would not have thought of time at all. Image or imagination constructs for humans the space that humans grasp. Because without the object for an eye to see, the eye cannot see. The eye means EYE. Without an object for an eye to see, the eye just cannot see anything. When we stand in long stretches of deserts, or when we're in the middle of an ocean without any object marking space, we just cannot understand how much space it is. Image constructs space for humans. Memory constructs time for humans, and image and memory together construct the human view of the world, the human world view in a way. What has happened to both these objects, both these agencies, both these capacities of humans, the human mind, is amazing. It is unprecedented in the history of the universe, and it is very bewildering for all of us. Let me go at this new change bit by bit. Perception is based on sensory experiences. For instance, when I touch something, I'm touching my cheek or nose or forehead, I understand in my brain that I'm touching a surface. The eye, the ears, sound, eyes, all these are sensory perceptions, smell, and all those perceptions formulate cognition of an experience in the human brain. For every animal it happens. It is not only for humans. It happens to human animal as well, human beings as well. But human beings have an additional ability which other animals do not have. And that ability is language. When unlike, say, tigers and lions and elephants and fish and birds, we speak very complex utterances conveying meaning. We speak in such a way that what is going inside our brains can be brought outside the brain. The scientists working on brain structures have described the human brain as the recursive brain. The recursive brain. That is, all other animals also have brains, and they think, and they balance their bodies, and they make their judgments and decisions. But the human brain, in addition to balancing the body and making judgments and thinking, is also capable of thinking about thinking about thought. So that is the recursive brain. Now, this recursive brain has enabled humans to articulate this thinking about thought. This articulation has taken, in the process of evolution, the form of language. So with the help of language, humans are able to put outside themselves the cognition, which perception brings an experience which the brain recognizes. But when it is put out, it becomes neither mine nor yours. It becomes altogether a third entity. It becomes what we can roughly approximately call the collected memory. I'm not talking of the collective memory, which is a different thing. That is in psychology, Jungian psychology, collective memories, collective unconscious, and all that. That's a very different affair altogether. I'm talking about the collected memory, the memory that many humans have put out, and therefore it gets collected in common space. It creates a space of itself. That newly created space, because of interpersonal exchange and communication, becomes in the course of time what we call knowledge, which in the initial times required no test of verification. But as humans progress, verification, checking whether it is fake news or authentic news, real experience or imagined experience, all that was brought to bear upon this collected memory. And in fact, if I were to oversimplify the entire history of knowledge in the world, all our museums, libraries, universities, schools are a kind of a forms of this collected memory. At the bottom of all of these things is this collected memory of humans, passed from one generation to the next generation. When the collected memory becomes too heavy, this intergenerational exchange requires many tricks of remembering. Because how would you remember memory of so many past generations? So people learned how to fragment that field, how to remember, recall, how to organize. In the course of time, humans had developed, thinkers or teachers or scientists, call them by whichever name, had developed methods of classifying this collected memory, or what we now can call knowledge. So knowledge was getting organized in different fields differently. Just to think of Europe, knowledge related to chemicals was organized in the form of chemical tables. Related to maths was getting organized in the form of mathematical tables. Knowledge related to zoology or botany or biology was getting organized in yet different forms of tables. In India, similarly, there are methods of remembering, and I may mention that when Lilavati was learning mathematics, her father could tell her complicated mathematical formulas in very simple shlokas, where every letter in the shloka, in the verse, represented some equation, some multiplication, some division. And so very complex field was compressed, made easy to remember, because knowledge was ultimately memory load, and the memory load had to be made easier to carry from one generation to the next generation. So in the process of making it easy to carry, this load was distributed in fragments, in tabular manners. But a time came when one tabulation of knowledge in one field did not tally with tabulation of knowledge in another field. And fields of knowledge are made by us, not by knowledge itself, because experience, remembered, is a gestalt. It is a combine. It's all one at one piece. During the 17th century, this problem was cracked by a French thinker by saying that do not organize knowledge in the form of those tables, in the form of some abstractions, but think of organizing those abstractions in the form of a higher order abstraction, which you could do by creating a string of zeros and ones. Now, the string of 0 and 1, and what does that 0 stand for? Nothing. It stands for an abstraction, which in turn might stand for things. So this 0 and 1, which later became the foundation of our modern computational sciences, was a great memory trick which enabled those who acquired this trick, those who learned this trick, to comprehend many disciplines, many sciences. And that's why any discipline in the fields of knowledge, in various fields of knowledge, which was compatible with that trick, was called a discipline, and that knowledge in that discipline was called universal knowledge. It was not knowledge about the universe. Even today, humans do not know enough about the universe. What we call the university today is primarily based on the ability to get students to link to the method of recognizing what is knowledge as against what is non-knowledge. In our time, this development of memory tricks has attained a level of sophistication which it would have been impossible for anyone to imagine just 50 years back. Today, the memory chip has almost entirely replaced natural memory, human memory. You look at yourself and see how many things you do by depending on the ability of your memory chip in the mobile to grasp. It is your mobile's memory chip or your computer's memory chip or the memory chips attached to the entrance of your university or the exit of your university or the cameras which watch you or the television sets which watch you, which you think you are watching. All of that memory, which is non-human, which is mechanically generated, but which is approximating the human intellect almost entirely now, is a new thing in the fields of knowledge. And it is because the nature of memory has undergone change. Nature of what humans thought is humanized memory, human memory or humanized memory. The artificial memories today humanize memory. Nature of that memory has changed, and therefore the nature of knowledge is changing. The next thing is the birth of camera. In that camera eye, an image was born, and soon in its history, that image acquired much larger reality, larger presence, more substantial impact-making ability than the image that the human eye could perceive. I mean, this, I'm saying camera to oversimplify. It could be the binocular, which is able to see the entire cosmos, which the human eye cannot. But the function of seeing, in short, was handed over by humans to non-human eyes. I mean, just now as I speak, I'm sitting in a very small town in Karnataka, and you're able to see me, which ordinary human eyes would not have, I don't think, but that has become, that is, I had mentioned that the Greeks were struggling to figure out how to dissociate, disentangle substance from the shadow. Today, the image by itself has its life. Just now, I'm not talking to you, you're not listening to me. My image is speaking to you, your image is listening to me through a device entirely dependent on artificial memory. When the substance, which is the human beings, their ability to see, their ability to remember, gets segregated, gets distanced, gets displaced by the ability of the shadow or the ability of artificial memory, the nature of the cosmos also, nature of the cosmos constructed by this artificial memory and artificial vision, artificial image and artificial memory. The cosmos based on that is different. Humans have great difficulty in recognizing it, and therefore humans today, and I come to the end of that part of my lecture, humans today have created a reality. I'm not talking about truth, reality, which is independent of the reality in which humans live. And humans are today living in the reality which surrounds them, as well as they live in the reality which they have created. I mean, today's citizens all over the world have to be some digital number, identification number, Aadhaar number, if you like, or social security number. Whether they are bodily present or not does not matter. The number must be, their number must be there. I will, I have given this elaborate background to what is happening to knowledge to say why human languages are diminishing. Very briefly, I can say out of 7,000 living languages in the world, at least two-thirds, more than 4,000, will simply perish in the next 30 years. Have no doubt about this. Of course, in the past, when some language went away, a new language replaced it. But now it is not this simple replacement, like a bus is going and one passenger gets down and another passenger takes the seat. That process is not possible anymore, because the process of evolution has brought the human brain to a level of fatigue of sounds. I want to show you a book. This is by Marianne Wolf. It's called Proust and the Squid. Proust is the French artist, writer. And squid, of course, is that little creature that you know. This study is about why people no longer want to read. And those of us who are working in universities know that students no longer want to read. There's a fatigue because the left part of the brain, which is called the Broca's lobe, is showing clear signs of human tirement, human fatigue towards deciphering the world through sound. And it is moving very fast, very rapidly, irrevocably, irreversibly, almost rashly towards deciphering interpreting the world through visuals. So we may come in the next 2-3 centuries to a time when humans might be able to speak words, but those words will not carry too much meaning. They will become what linguists call the phatic communication. Just as in the English language, when we see somebody in the morning, we say, "Hey, good morning." And the person says, "Yeah, good morning." What does it mean? It means absolutely nothing. It means, yeah, you are there, I am here. The presence is marred. So the words that we will use in future will be phatic communication words. Words that do not make any meaningful communication, but words which are deliberately produced to make a meaningless communication. The communication in future will be through a language, if I may call it language, of visuals, visual signs. It still will have some shell cover of nominal cover of sound, but predominantly it will be visual. And you will not disagree with me, friends, if I say, when I say this, that if you watch any of your family members today, you know that most of the time they are in the cyberspace rather than in the real space. Most of the time they are looking at their mobiles rather than looking at you and listening to or talking to you. And this is a universal condition. In India, out of 140 crores, if 125 crores are using mobiles, as against 140 crores, only about 100 crores somehow barely manage to read. Languages are diminishing all over the world. Out of 7,000 languages, from my study of Indian languages, from the linguistic survey of hundreds of languages in the country, I can say with great sadness in my heart that we are in the age of the death of language. languages are diminishing. But all of these philosophical things and history of the world and history of knowledge that I presented before you, how does it actually impinge on the idea of development? You know, in India alone, in the 2011 census, the census had listed 1,369 mother tongues. Out of these 1,369 mother tongues, the largest is Hindi, spoken by 52 crores. Then comes Bangla, spoken by some 21 crores. Then comes Marathi, spoken by 8 crores. Then Telugu and so on. And if you take the first 20 languages, first 15 languages out of the box, they represent about 96.3% population. The remaining 3 or 4% population speaks these hundreds of languages. And who are these 3 or 4% people speaking those languages? They are the nomadic communities, they are the coastal communities, they are the Adivasis. They are the people who are left at the tail end of development. So, knowledge is developing very rapidly. Many knowledges have sprung up. There is a knowledge in the virtual world, knowledge is in the real world. Physics in the real world is no longer like physics of the virtual world. Chemistry in the real world is no longer like chemistry in the virtual world. The past tense and the future tense of the real world no longer exist in the virtual world, they collapse. Yes, that's fantastic. But what is happening to those 3 or 4% people that I mentioned, whose languages are most certainly disappearing in less than 15 years? Who are they? The poorest among the poor. The ones whose land is owned by them, but the papers related to the documents related to the land are owned by the government, the Adivasis, or denotified tribes who for no fault of theirs were declared by the British as criminal tribes, or those who have migrated from some, let's say Burma, Myanmar or Bangladesh, who come to Assam, the tribal communities. I'm thinking of the tribal communities. They're without the identification of citizenship, without their digital number, which makes them real citizens. I mean, they're there physically, but digitally they're absent. They're made absent. They're made to disappear. This situation is really very frightening. Let me add here, at least for your consideration. This world is today split in 2 completely diametrically opposite directions. In one direction, there is an overwhelming optimism, and this is based on the computation of a Russian astronaut in 1960s, 70s. The computation was that the calculation was, if we, he said that all human migration in history has been towards the direction where there is greater source of energy, in the direction of source of energy. And so he said, look, on this earth, everybody is using some 30, 40, 50, 100, 300, 500,000 units of energy every month. What if we get 1 million units every month? And so he, on the basis of that idea of development, a mathematician called Dyson actually proposed a shell around the earth, which will open at, by using your remote, it will open and close and trap all the energy coming from the sun for the use of humans. And if this, and by the way, this is not just an imagination, tenders have been floated in Canada to build the Dyson shell around the earth, 10,000 kilometers above the earth. A shell built of using light rays. Now, when and if such a thing becomes possible, then humans will be able to have their breakfast here, go to the Mars, return for lunch once again to the earth. Because the amount of energy available to everybody will be trillion times more than what it is today. So there won't be any food shortage, there won't be any material shortage, there won't be economic lagging behind it. This is the view that many people think in the world is possible. Development as an endless road, as an unlimited ocean open for the fishers, those who want to fish in that ocean, it is open for them. Or development is imagined as an empty room with enormous height, where human animals are put in to hunt each other and aspire to touch the very top of that empty space. This is one view of development, which unfortunately is the dominant paradigm of development today. But there is another view of development, and that view says that humans have crossed all the tipping points that can keep humans safe. In our world, almost 9,500 years before Christ, the Holocene began. Holocene is a climate age in which the warming, the temperature started rising, clearing space north of the equator and south of the equator, because the snows started melting. Snows built in a period of 7,000 years preceding the Holocene had almost touched the equator, not exactly, but almost touched the equator. The snow started melting and space became available. Then the blades of grass started growing with shrubs and herbs growing. Birds came, animals came, humans could feed on them, therefore human population increased. Human settlements became possible, human civilizations emerged. That has been the history since Holocene, last 12,000 years. Scientists got together some time back, 5 years back. I remember I was at Cambridge on that day when in London they were meeting, and they said, Holocene is over. We have entered the Anthropocene. Anthropocene is that climatic age which will create human footprint on ecology in such a way that devastating footprint can never be reversed. It is irreversible decline of the climate, irreversible diminishing of the earth resources, irreversible beginning of the death of existence. I mentioned languages, but languages is, it's a tragedy. Languages are dying. It's very tragic. I love my mother tongue like I love my mother. It's very tragic if that language goes. But here, scientists are saying that in Anthropocene, where we entered, going back is impossible. We are sliding down. The best we can do is to slow down the sliding. We cannot go back to where we began. Under such a situation, this limitless craving for energy, endless accumulation of wealth, leaves so many small communities, not just human communities, but communities which are without language, that is the animals, environmental communities. They are left to languish without any hope. Uneven development in the world is not just an economic crisis. It is not just a question of food shortage or water shortage in a given year or a given area. The development crisis in the world is not just the question of where the land is sandy or wetland. It is not the question of climatic variations around the earth. It is the question of a completely new philosophy of how we mobilize ourselves, how we organize ourselves. We have fortunately entered after the French Revolution in an era where liberty, equality, and fraternity came to be cherished values. Throughout the 19th century, nation after nation started getting inspired by the idea of independence. But today, though those changes brought in the idea of democracy for all of us, today we'll have to think of a cosmocracy where humans think of not just human beings, but other species, plant species, and animal species. Think of other planets, because the Earth is crucial for a cosmic balance also. And so this uneven development has to be halted. We all will have to think new politics, new sociology, new knowledge, which will bring humans to the center of the world, not for consumption, but for protection. Not for hurting the earth, but keeping the earth. Humans have to learn to say, the earth does not belong to me. I belong to the earth. I think that humility, that love necessary for that humility is at the heart of the Baha'i teaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Devy, for this really magisterial panorama that you gave us, really conceptually taking us through the history of knowledge and thinking of its connection with language, and then bringing us to the contemporary situation that we find ourselves in. I think there is a lot that Professor Devy in this has managed to convey in this lecture, which I'm sure the participants are still processing. And please feel free to share your questions on the Q&A box. We don't have a lot of time left, but I'm sure there would be many in the audience who want to take this opportunity to put their questions. Professor, while we wait for questions, so I just wanted to put a question from the really thought-provoking ideas that you shared. One of the things that I was thinking of is, now in this age of the Anthropocene, you talked about the ability to, in a sense, how language really gave us a sense of connection. And one question that comes is, how does one not develop a pessimistic view of this techno age that we are in? It seems like what you are saying is there needs to be a fundamental transformation in our capacity to think across time and space. On the one hand, if we want to be this person who you were talking of, who has the love and humility, who's central to the world as it is evolving, but with that spirit of humility and love, it seems that one of the things we need is to have a really long-term perspective, to be able to live today for generations yet unborn, which is probably one of the capacities that we haven't had. But whatever capacity we had for forward looking has shrunk. In a sense, now we live for today, we live for now. So one question is, how does one, I don't know if you have reflections on this, that really what the world needs is a generation that can think about its development in long stretches of time. I mean, if you really want to address climate change, you can't be just operating in a 5-year time frame. Then the other thing is space. Like, how does one genuinely develop a consciousness where one feels connectedness to let's say tribal people in in the coastal areas, you know, to have a genuine emotional response to the suffering that they endure, because unless this idea of interconnectedness doesn't actually resonate, doesn't it actually evoke an emotional response in human beings, it's going to be difficult to move towards this. So do you have hope that something like this is possible? Can human agency take us in that direction?
I'm a great optimist, and I will say, like Shelley said, hope till hope creates the thing it contemplates. And I'll say why I'm saying this. I mean, we all know that the Big Bang probably took place, and 1400 crore, 14 billion years ago. The solar system 6.5, or the Earth came about 400 crores of years ago, and life started developing 2.5, the crore years ago on the face of the Earth, where and life in simple form, like amoeba, as the scientists have told us, simple cell to complex cell, and through complex cells, through now the structures that we have, structures of life, such as our bodies, our brains, the fascinating chemistry, all of that, we are here. But till yesterday, until very recently, we were the creature of the evolution. We are the creature of nature. We were created by nature. Humans have taken upon themselves now the responsibility to create nature. Nature created us. I mean, it is not for nothing that in the 19th century, this entire debate, philosophical debate about nature and human nature started. That's actually, there was no need to segregate the two. Human nature, humans were part of nature. But humans have started designing nature today. And when I say designing nature, I'm not talking about some house garden or architecture of cities, the cosmos in a way. The people are trying to see if they can deflect the orbit of small planets, heavenly bodies, by using extra terrestrial force from located on another planet. Now, when humans want to construct, that is, our idea till yesterday was God created us. I mean, God was an ultimate metaphor for nature, the process of creation, our entire past. Now, humans have decided to become cyborgs, or whatever, I mean, the hybrid of the physical, biological being and this artificial memory, hybrid of that, or robots. I mean, in 25 years' time, we will have news about, my cousin's daughter or son getting married to a robot. So it will not be too far. It's frightening, it's sickening, but it is happening because humans have decided to create nature, create the cosmos, control the cosmos. The human intellect has there is when you want to push an object outside the magnetic force of the earth, gravitational force of the earth, it requires a special velocity, and that, I think, we have acquired that velocity now. The human intellect has it is called escaping velocity or whatever. That escape velocity we got now. At this time, our entire education, our public discourse, our philosophies, our arts, and our actions will have to bring in a tremendous ethical awareness. And these ethics will not be the ethics of yesterday, like ethics related only to man-woman relationship or procreation, ethics related to one self and the neighbor, that is social law or criminal law. These ethics will be of a different nature. We have to make it's challenging, but because the human intelligence has arrived at this stage, perhaps we may be able to attain that. I am optimistic about it. We will have to, humans will have to move forward with tremendous caution. Let me add in passing, we see today a complete madness, frenzy about theological misapprehensions, misunderstandings, and it is happening not just because people have lost their brains suddenly. It is not because till 1950 or 1930 or 1970 their brains were all right, but now they're all spoiled because of the WhatsApp. Of course, the WhatsApp thing is completely trivial, but it is this kind of sudden surge of theological insistence in every domain, from business to politics, cinema to arts, science, is because that idea of God is coming to an end. We will have to devise a new dharma, a new idea of what is moral, a new idea of what is social, and new idea of what is ethical. And ethical will be the foundation of that. Now, what those ethics will be is a complex, difficult thing like international law. This is interplanetary ethics would be very difficult. I am too small a person to even give a glimpse of what is to come. But there are thinkers. An Australian political scientist has been writing books about the idea of cosmocracy is emerging. From democracy, we cannot go back to dictatorships. At the moment, the scene is that democracies are collapsing, but it is not because the world may go back to, and I feel sad about the collapse of democracy, but not because the world will move forward to dictatorships. The world will move forward, in my humble opinion, to an idea of cosmocracy, where representation of not just humans. In the parliament today, humans are represented. Voters are represented, not all humans. Children are left out, but adults. But even plants and animals will be represented. And I think when humans will have to learn to be connected with the other species, the diversities, and value that diversity, and then we might be able to construct some new ethics on the basis of which we can go forward. Is the task easy? The answer is not at all. But is the task impossible to perform? The answer is no, not at all. Human intellect has come a long way, particularly in the last 70,000 years after acquiring language ability. Thank you. I'm sorry, my answer was too long for the question. Your question is so important, I had to.
It needed to be. Thank you, Professor. So do you see signs that we are moving in that direction? Do you see any hopeful trends?
Yes, I do. Scientists have developed a new humility. Science was very arrogant about 20 or 30 years ago, and it thought that it could solve probably most of the problems. But out of this new humility in the last 5 or 10 years, scientists all over the world have actually discarded the standards they had made, universal standards, such as what is a foot, what is a meter, what is a centigrade, what is a, what is a volumetric measure. They are discarded. They realize that we cannot, those standards are inadequate. Those standards were created soon after the French Revolution. The French Science Academy had created those standards. But that platinum rod kept for 1 meter is now thing of the past, is officially discarded. Scientists have learned a new humility, particularly as in astrophysics. People have said that we don't think we have been able to get to the bottom of the entire cosmos. We have seen only a part of it. People who are dealing with knowledge are ready today to say that we know only a small fraction of what knowledge is. The arrogance of science, arrogance of knowledge, in old times a Pandit used to say, show me your palm and I can tell you all about your life. That arrogance is gone. In the genuinely good and advanced cutting edge scientific institutions. So we live in uncertainties. Humans are developing the ability to live amidst uncertainties. Shakespeare was praised by Keats in these words. Keats said the greatest thing about Shakespeare was he had that negative capability, which is the ability to live amidst uncertainties without feeling challenged. So humans are today willing to live amidst uncertainties. When I was young, I passed my MA examination when I was 21 or 22. And the only thing my parents could say, now you must become a lecturer. I said, why? Because then by the time you retire, you will have a house of your own. That was an era when you took up a job, you remained there till the end of the world. The attrition, the movement, the quick movements, they look crazy to my eye because I'm an old world person. But the new age has learned to accept uncertainties as the normal condition of life. Not unpredictability, not uncertainties. I think uncertainties at their back, in their foundation, is the idea of humility. And if knowledges and sciences learn to learn this humility, that mood will generate in the society, human society, a new ethical bond with the rest of existence, rest of the existence. Let's set aside the politicians who are quarreling, fighting wars and all that these are all old habits of the mind. 19th century, in some cases, their 15th century habits of the mind are manifesting today. Or even when people are mob lynched, they're beaten, there's 3,000-year-old habit is resurfacing. But these are aberrations and they will pass. Humans are far more intelligent than humans recognize themselves. Therefore, I am optimistic. I believe that every human being is basically a good human being. I believe in the goodness of humans, which does not reach the level of news. Badness of a human reaches the headlines every morning or evening, but millions of good people are there in the world. Those good people will change the world. In the meanwhile, let the bad people rule us, do politics, destroy everything that is good. But the goodness cannot be destroyed. It is like nature, an invisible and perennial energy, and that connects us to the past and the future. It will keep us going. I have faith. I have hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Maybe we can take one last question because also we've gone beyond our time limit. There is a question by Sina who says, thank you so much, sir. was truly a heart-touching and inspiring lecture. As I continue to absorb the thought-provoking ideas, I wanted to ask, what can we do to try and stop or slow down both at personal level and also at the level of engaging with society, this decline of language? Can we do anything about it, Professor, or is this, do we have a fatalistic view about?
No, we can do a lot. One thing is we must gain a mastery over silence, because silence is the framework within which language is constructed. Had there been no silence, let's say when I say a sentence, if I were to put all the words together like a running thing, you'll not. There has to be that break between the words. It is those breaks between the words that string the words together and make them meaningful. So silence. We must respect silence, and we must learn why so many communities are being silenced and question that. Our work cannot be just of a charitable nature. Because if there is a vanishing language and all of us rush there, oh, this language is vanishing, that language is not going to survive. All that can happen is it can become a picnic spot of linguists. But if we look at why that language vanished, how those people were silenced, what can be done to prevent that kind of silencing of the people, and which means we have to acquaint ourselves with what silence is. Unfortunately, bad people in the world are cleverer, and they already made silence as a new industry. The largest 21st century industry is going to be marketing of silence. Just as in the 20th century, marketing of language, and colonialism was through marketing of language, publishing and knowledges were marketing of language, social control was through marketing of language. Marketing of silence is becoming a new industry. I mean, you will get so many books to read and articles on how silence is being marketed and what a flourishing industry it has become. In aeroplanes today, people don't buy a simple ticket or ticket with lunch or breakfast order with, buy a ticket with the earplugs that will allow them to travel without feeling the noise, the sound of the aeroplane. Stations and public spaces are being silenced. The classrooms are also made as silent classrooms where only the voice of the teacher can be heard. We must master silence. We must control it. We must make it behave. Now, what I'm saying might all sound like rather enigmatic or like metaphoric. But when I went to work with Adivasis 30 years back, for the first 2 years, I did not utter a single word. I was listening to them. And it is through that I could understand the pain not spoken by them, not pain in what they spoke, but pain in their non-speaking was much hurting. For a diminishing language, what we can do is to listen to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Really, you have left us with profound reflections, but very hopeful at the same time. While on the one hand, I'm sure all of us leave this lecture with our consciousness raised and broadened immensely, there's also hope. And I think, and I would like to thank you for that, for showing us where you see the hope lying for the future, and the ways in which we can, as everyday citizens, contribute to this movement towards, a more like a cosmocracy as you described it, or a much more interconnected, united, just, and a world that is has found its balance with the biosphere. Thank you again, Professor Devy. Unfortunately, we don't have unlimited time. We would have loved to hear more, much more, and taken more questions, but we had committed to an hour, so we shouldn't you know, stretch beyond what our commitment has been.
I'll meet your group again sometime in future. Thank you for asking me to come. I have enjoyed being with you. Thank you. Indeed, I'm grateful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to all the participants as